The coffee shop on 5th Street buzzed with the usual morning crowd when Sarah Martinez walked through the door, her worn jeans and simple black t-shirt drawing no particular attention. At 28, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that most people missed entirely. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes held a depth that spoke of experiences far beyond her apparent years. She ordered her usual black coffee and found a corner table, opening her laptop to continue working on her freelance graphic design projects. The work paid the bills, barely, but it allowed her the flexibility she needed as she tried to rebuild her life. 3 months had passed since she'd moved to the small coastal town in Virginia, seeking anonymity and peace after everything that had happened. The bell above the door chimed as 3 men entered, their voices loud and boastful. Sarah didn't look up from her screen, but she couldn't help overhearing their conversation as they approached the counter. "I'm telling you, Mike, that obstacle course was nothing compared to what we did in basic," said the tallest of the three, a man with bleached hair and an oversized military-style jacket covered in patches. "Navy SEALs train on courses 10 times harder than that CrossFit garbage." His companion, shorter but equally loud, nodded enthusiastically. "Jake's right. Most people have no idea what real military training looks like. These wannabes at the gym think they're tough, but they'd never survive SEAL selection." The third man, older and wearing a baseball cap with various military insignia, chimed in. "The things we've seen, the missions we've been on. Civilians just don't understand the sacrifice." Sarah's fingers paused over her keyboard. Something about their tone, their casual claims, struck her as off. She'd heard similar conversations before, always from men who seemed more interested in the image than the reality of military service. "Order for Jake," called the barista, and the tall man swaggered forward to collect 3 large coffees. As he returned to his friends, Sarah noticed the patches on his jacket more clearly. The SEAL Trident, the Army Ranger tab, even a Green Beret patch, an impossible combination for any real service member. The 3 men settled at a table near Sarah's, their voices growing even louder as they launched into increasingly elaborate tales of their supposed military exploits. Jake pulled out his phone and began showing pictures, describing classified missions in Afghanistan and covert operations that sounded like they'd been lifted from Hollywood movies. "This one time in Kandahar," Jake said, his voice carrying across the small cafe, "our team had to infiltrate a Taliban compound. 6 of us against 50 hostiles. We were outnumbered, outgunned, but SEALs never quit." Sarah found herself clenching her jaw as the story continued, each detail more outrageous than the last. She'd heard enough war stories to know the difference between truth and fiction, and everything about these men screamed fake. A young woman at a nearby table was listening intently, her eyes wide with admiration. She couldn't have been more than 20, probably a college student, and she was clearly impressed by what she was hearing. "Excuse me," the young woman said, approaching their table during a brief pause in Jake's narrative. "I just wanted to say thank you for your service. My brother's thinking about joining the military, and hearing stories like yours really inspires him." Jake's chest puffed out with pride. "It's our duty to serve, ma'am. The SEALs taught me what it really means to be a warrior. Your brother should definitely consider the Navy. We could use more heroes like him." Sarah felt her stomach turn. The casual way these men were deceiving this innocent young woman, trading on the genuine sacrifice of real service members, ignited something fierce inside her. But she remained quiet, forcing herself to focus on her work. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with each man trying to top the other's fictional exploits. They spoke of medals they'd never earned, battles they'd never fought, and brothers in arms who existed only in their imagination. The young woman listened raptly, asking questions that only encouraged more elaborate lies. Finally, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She closed her laptop and stood, walking to the counter to get a refill of her coffee. As she waited, she found herself standing directly behind Jake, who was still regaling his audience with tales of underwater demolition missions and high-altitude parachute insertions. "That's interesting," Sarah said quietly, her voice cutting through Jake's animated description of a supposed mission in Iraq. "Which class were you in at Coronado?" The 3 men turned to look at her, surprised by the interruption. Jake's eyes narrowed as he sized her up, a young woman in casual clothes who didn't look like she could possibly understand military terminology. "What did you say?" Jake asked, his tone defensive. "Bud/S class number," Sarah repeated, her voice calm but firm. "Basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. If you went through SEAL selection, you'd have a class number."
It's pretty basic information for any SEAL. Jake's face reddened slightly. That's classified information, lady. I can't go around telling civilians about operational details. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Class numbers aren't classified. They're public record. Hell, they're on Wikipedia. The cafe had grown quieter, other patrons beginning to sense tension in the air. The young woman who'd been listening looked confused, glancing back and forth between Sarah and the three men. "Look, honey," said Mike, the shorter man, his tone condescending. "I don't know what you think you know about the military, but maybe you should stick to whatever it is you do for work and let the real warriors share their stories." "Real warriors," Sarah repeated, her voice flat. "That's an interesting choice of words." She took a step closer to their table, her posture relaxed but somehow commanding attention. "Tell me, Jake, what's your favorite memory from Hell Week?" Jake's jaw worked silently for a moment. That's personal. Some things are too intense to share with civilians." "I understand," Sarah said, nodding slowly. "Must be hard to remember something that never happened." The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Jake shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he demanded. "You think you can come over here and disrespect veterans? What branch did you serve in? What have you ever done for your country?" The entire cafe was watching now, conversations halting as the confrontation escalated. Sarah stood her ground, meeting Jake's angry glare with steady calm. "I never claimed to be a veteran," she said simply. "But I know enough to recognize stolen valor when I hear it." "Stolen valor?" Jake's voice rose to a shout. "Lady, you have no idea what you're talking about. I served 8 years in the teams. I've got medals, I've got documentation, I've got brothers who died beside me. You're nobody to question my service." "Then, prove it," Sarah said quietly. The challenge was simple, direct, and it hit Jake like a physical blow. His mouth opened and closed without sound, his face cycling through anger, confusion, and something that might have been fear. "I don't have to prove anything to you," he finally managed. "No," Sarah agreed. "You don't. But real SEALs usually don't mind talking about their training. They remember their instructors' names. They know the layout of the compound at Coronado. They understand the difference between a trident and a warfare pin." She gestured toward the patches covering Jake's jacket. "And they definitely don't wear Army, Navy, and Air Force badges all at the same time." The observation hit home. Several people in the cafe began murmuring, and the young woman who'd been so impressed earlier was now looking at Jake with confusion and growing suspicion. "You know what, lady?" Jake said, his voice shaking with rage. "You want to play games? Fine. But I guarantee you've never done a quarter of what I've done. I've killed people. I've saved lives. I've served my country with honor, and I don't need some random nobody questioning my record." Sarah's expression didn't change. "What's your rate?" "What?" "Your Navy rate. Your job classification. What did you do in the Navy besides your SEAL training?" Again, Jake faltered. Any real Navy veteran would have answered immediately, "It's one of the first things you learn, as fundamental as your own name." But Jake clearly had no idea what she was asking. That's need-to-know information," he said weakly. "No, it's not," Sarah replied. "It's literally printed on your dog tags and service records. Every sailor knows their rate." The silence that followed was deafening. Mike and the third man, whose name Sarah still hadn't caught, were looking increasingly uncomfortable. They'd probably started this charade as harmless bragging, never expecting to be called out by someone who actually knew what she was talking about. "Look," Mike said, trying to defuse the situation. "Maybe we should all just calm down. There's no need for this to get ugly." But Jake was too far gone, his pride and anger overriding any sense of self-preservation. "No, Mike. This woman wants to play expert, let her play. But when she's done running her mouth, I want an apology. I want her to admit she was wrong about heroes who gave everything for freedom." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. The casual way he was doubling down on his lies, the righteous indignation he was displaying while dishonoring real service members, it was too much. "Heroes," she repeated slowly. "You want to talk about heroes?"
She rolled up her right sleeve, revealing a tattoo on her forearm that made Jake's eyes widen. It was a simple design, a trident, anchor, and eagle rendered in black ink, but with small details that marked it as something special. Below it, in smaller text, were numbers and letters that meant nothing to most people but everything to those who knew.
You recognize this? Sarah asked quietly. Jake's face had gone pale. The young woman was staring at the tattoo, clearly trying to understand its significance.
That's just a tattoo, Jake said, but his voice had lost all its earlier confidence.
Yes, it is, Sarah agreed. But it's a very specific tattoo. One that's earned, not bought. One that represents something real.
She let her sleeve fall back down, covering the tattoo again. See, Jake, real SEALs don't usually go around bragging about classified missions in coffee shops.
They don't wear impossible combinations of military patches. And they definitely don't lie to innocent young people about service they never performed.
You're crazy, Jake said, but he was backing away from the table now. You're some kind of military groupie who thinks she knows everything because she watched a few movies.
Maybe, Sarah said calmly.
But groupies usually don't have BUD/S-class tattoos.
The admission hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode.
Everyone in the cafe was staring now, the implication of her words sinking in slowly but inevitably.
That's impossible, Mike said quietly. Women can't. I mean, they don't. Allow women in SEAL training? Sarah finished. You're right. They don't. Officially.
She gathered her things, slinging her laptop bag over her shoulder. But sometimes, when the mission requires it, when lives are on the line, sometimes the military makes exceptions. Sometimes they find other ways to get the job done. Jake's mouth was working like a fish out of water.
You're lying. You're making this up. Women have never been SEALs. You're absolutely right, Sarah said, meeting his eyes. Women have never been SEALs. Just like you've never been one either.
She started toward the door, then paused and turned back.
Oh, and Jake? That young lady you were lying to? Her brother really is thinking about joining the military.
Maybe next time, instead of filling her head with fantasy stories, you could tell her the truth, that real service means sacrifice, honor, and integrity.
3 things you clearly know nothing about.
The cafe erupted in whispers and murmurs as Sarah pushed through the door and stepped into the bright morning sunlight. Behind her, she could hear Jake's voice raised in angry protest, but she didn't look back. She had taken only a few steps down the sidewalk when she heard the door open again. The young woman from the cafe was following her, jogging to catch up.
"Excuse me," the woman called.
"Wait, please." Sarah stopped and turned, seeing the confusion and curiosity in the young woman's eyes.
"I'm sorry," the young woman said. "I know this is probably weird, but were you telling the truth in there? About the military stuff?" Sarah studied her for a moment.
She was even younger up close, maybe 19 or 20, with honest eyes and an open expression that reminded Sarah of herself at that age.
"What's your name?" Sarah asked. "Emma. Emma Collins."
"I'm a sophomore at the community college here."
"Nice to meet you, Emma. I'm Sarah." She paused, choosing her words carefully. The truth is complicated.
But those men in there were definitely lying about their military service.
I can promise you that. How do you know? Sarah smiled slightly.
Because real veterans don't usually feel the need to prove how tough they are to college students in coffee shops.
They've got nothing to prove to anyone except themselves. Emma nodded slowly. My brother really is thinking about joining. The Marines, actually. He's been talking about it since he graduated high school.
The Marines are a good choice, Sarah said. Tell him to talk to real recruiters, real veterans.
Not guys like those 3.
The military has enough real heroes without needing to make up fake ones.
Can I ask you something? Emma said hesitantly. Sure. That tattoo you showed them. What did it really mean? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the traffic move past on the busy street.
It means, she said finally, that sometimes the most important battles are the ones nobody ever hears about. And sometimes the biggest heroes are the ones who never get recognition for what they've done. She started to walk away, then turned back one more time.
Emma? Tell your brother something for me. Tell him that serving his country isn't about glory or recognition. It's about being willing to do what's right, even when nobody's watching. Especially when nobody's watching. Emma watched as Sarah disappeared into the crowd of morning pedestrians, questions burning in her mind.
In the cafe behind her, she could still hear Jake's voice, raised in angry defense, but somehow his words seemed hollow now, meaningless compared to the quiet authority that had radiated from the young woman who challenged him. As Sarah walked back to her small apartment, she tried to push the encounter from her mind. She'd broken her own rule about staying anonymous, about keeping her head down and avoiding attention. But something about those men's casual lies, their willingness to deceive someone as innocent as Emma, had triggered something deep inside her. She thought about the tattoo on her arm, hidden again beneath her sleeve. Such a small thing to carry such weight, such memories. Most people would never understand what it represented, the price that had been paid for the simple black ink under her skin. Her phone buzzed with a text from her current client, asking about the progress on a logo design. Real life, normal life, the kind of existence she was trying to build for herself. She typed back a quick response, promising to have the first drafts ready by the end of the day. But, as she climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed new life was about to become much more complicated. She'd managed to stay under the radar for 3 months, but confrontations like the one in the cafe had a way of creating ripples, drawing attention from people who might recognize more than just a suspicious tattoo. She unlocked her door and stepped inside, setting her laptop bag on the small kitchen table. The apartment was sparse but clean, furnished with the basics and little else. It was temporary, like everything else in her current life, a way station while she figured out what came next. Sarah made herself a sandwich and tried to focus on work, but her mind kept drifting back to the cafe, to Jake's angry face and Emma's confused questions. She tried to do the right thing, to stand up for the honor of real veterans, but she wondered if the cost would prove too high. Outside her window, the small coastal town continued its quiet daily routine, oblivious to the fact that one of its newest residents carried secrets that could change everything. Sarah Martinez had come here seeking peace, anonymity, and a chance to start over. But some things, she was beginning to realize, could never be left behind completely. Some tattoos went deeper than skin, marking not just the flesh but the soul itself. And sometimes, no matter how far you ran or how carefully you hid, the past had a way of finding you when you least expected it. The afternoon stretched ahead of her, filled with deadlines and normal concerns, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted today. In standing up to those fake veterans, in defending the honor of real service members, she'd opened a door that she wasn't sure she could close again. And, somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice wondered if maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running from who she really was. 3 days after the coffee shop incident, Sarah thought the worst was behind her. She'd managed to complete her client work on schedule, and life seemed to be returning to its quiet, anonymous rhythm. But small towns have a way of keeping secrets poorly, and word of the confrontation had spread faster than she'd anticipated. She was walking back from the grocery store when she noticed the police car parked outside her apartment building. 2 officers stood beside it, one talking into his radio while the other examined a clipboard. Sarah's heart rate spiked, but she forced herself to maintain a casual pace as she approached. Sarah Martinez called the older of the 2 officers as she reached the building's entrance. "That's me," she replied, shifting her grocery bags to one arm. "I'm Officer Reynolds, this is Officer Chen. We'd like to ask you a few questions about an incident at Murphy's coffee shop earlier this week." Sarah nodded slowly. "What kind of questions?" "There's been a complaint filed," Officer Chen explained, consulting his notes. 3 men claim you harassed them and made false accusations about their military service. They're saying you created a public disturbance." "I see," Sarah said. "And what exactly are they claiming I did?" Officer Reynolds cleared his throat. "According to their statement, you approached their table unprovoked and began making accusations about stolen valor. They say you claimed to have military experience yourself and became aggressive when they questioned your credentials." Sarah almost laughed at the reversed version of events, but she kept her expression neutral. "That's an interesting interpretation of what happened. So you don't deny there was a confrontation?" Officer Chen asked. "There was a conversation," Sarah corrected. "I questioned some claims they were making about military service. When they couldn't answer basic questions that any veteran would know, it became clear they were lying. The two officers exchanged glances. Officer Reynolds stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly.
Look, Ms. Martinez, between you and me, we've had run-ins with Jake Morrison before.
He's got a history of embellishing his background. But he's filed an official complaint, and we have to follow up.
I understand, Sarah said. Am I being charged with something?
Not at this time, Officer Chen replied. But we'd like to get your side of the story on record.
Would you be willing to come to the station and give a statement?
Sarah considered her options. Refusing would only make her look guilty, but going to the police station meant answering questions she wasn't prepared to address. Still, she'd dealt with law enforcement before, and she knew how to navigate these waters carefully.
Of course, she said. When would be convenient? How about now? Officer Reynolds suggested. It shouldn't take long.
20 minutes later, Sarah found herself in a small interview room at the local police station, facing Officer Reynolds across a worn wooden table. Officer Chen sat in the corner, taking notes, while a digital recorder captured every word.
Let's start from the beginning, Officer Reynolds said. What were you doing at Murphy's coffee shop on Tuesday morning?
Sarah recounted the morning's events carefully, sticking to facts and avoiding speculation about the three men's motivations. She described their increasingly elaborate stories, their inability to answer basic military questions, and her decision to speak up when she felt they were deceiving the young woman who'd approached their table. And, when you challenged them, Officer Reynolds asked, you showed them a tattoo.
Can you describe that tattoo for me? Sarah hesitated.
This was the question she'd been dreading, the one that would require her to reveal more than she wanted about her past. It's a military tattoo, she said carefully.
Specific to certain, specialized units. What kind of specialized units?
Naval Special Warfare, Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper.
Officer Reynolds leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. You're claiming to be a Navy SEAL? I'm not claiming anything, Sarah said firmly.
I'm simply stating that I have knowledge of military procedures and protocols that allowed me to recognize when someone is lying about their service.
But, where did that knowledge come from? Officer Chen interjected from his corner. Do you have military experience yourself?
Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing her response. The truth was complicated, dangerous, and not something she could explain without revealing information that was still classified at the highest levels.
I'd prefer not to get into the specifics of my background, she said finally.
But I can tell you with absolute certainty that Jake Morrison and his friends have never served in any capacity in the U.S. military.
Officer Reynolds sat back, studying her face.
Ms. Martinez, with all due respect, that's a pretty serious accusation.
Stolen valor is a federal crime.
If you're making these claims, you need to be prepared to back them up.
I understand that, Sarah replied. And I'm willing to stand by everything I said. Before Officer Reynolds could respond, there was a knock on the door.
Officer Chen rose to answer it, opening the door just wide enough for a whispered conversation with someone in the hallway. When he turned back, his expression had changed. There's someone here to see Ms. Martinez, he said, his tone carefully neutral.
I didn't call anyone, Sarah said, confusion evident in her voice. The door opened wider, and a man stepped into the room. He was in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of bearing that spoke of decades in military service. He wore a simple navy blazer over khakis, but something about his presence filled the small room completely. Officers, he said, his voice carrying quiet authority. I'm Admiral Robert Lawson, U.S. Navy. I'd like to speak with Ms. Martinez, if you don't mind. Sarah's blood turned to ice water. She recognized the name, though she'd never met the man in person.
Admiral Lawson was a legend in certain circles, a career special operations officer who'd risen to the highest levels of naval command. More importantly, he was one of the few people who knew the truth about her past. Officer Reynolds looked between the Admiral and Sarah, clearly out of his depth. Sir, we're in the middle of taking a statement about a possible stolen valor case. I'm aware of the situation, Admiral Lawson said calmly. In fact, I drove down from Norfolk specifically to address this matter.
Ms. Martinez, would you mind if I saw that tattoo these gentlemen mentioned? Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she rolled up her sleeve, revealing the black trident and eagle design. Admiral Lawson studied it carefully, his expression unreadable. Officer Reynolds, he said finally, I need you to understand something very important. This tattoo is authentic.
Ms. Martinez earned every line of that ink through service to her country that I cannot and will not discuss in detail. But I can tell you that questioning her credentials is not only inappropriate, it's potentially damaging to ongoing national security interests. The room fell silent. Officer Chen's pen had stopped moving, and Officer Reynolds was staring at the Admiral as if trying to process information that didn't fit any framework he understood. "Sir," Officer Reynolds said carefully, with respect, "women aren't allowed in SEAL training."
That's been policy for decades.
Admiral Lawson's smile was thin and cold.
"Officer, there are many things about military operations that aren't public knowledge.
Sometimes, when the mission requires it, when lives are at stake, we find ways to accomplish objectives that fall outside normal parameters." He turned to Sarah, his expression softening slightly.
Petty Officer Martinez served with distinction in operations that remain classified.
Her training, her service record, and her qualifications are beyond reproach. The tattoo you're questioning represents not just individual achievement, but sacrifice on behalf of this country that very few people could understand or appreciate. Sarah felt her throat tighten at the use of her old rank. She hadn't heard it in 3 years, and the memories it brought back were both painful and precious. "Admiral," she said quietly, "you didn't need to come here." "Yes, I did," he replied firmly. "When word reached my office that someone was questioning the service record of one of our people, I made it my business to set the record straight."
Officer Reynolds cleared his throat nervously. "So the complaint about stolen valor should be dismissed immediately," Admiral Lawson finished.
"Moreover, if Mr. Morrison continues to make false claims about his own military service, he may find himself facing federal charges. I've already had my staff begin an investigation into his background."
The officer nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. We'll take care of that right away." Admiral Lawson turned back to Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, could I speak with you privately for a moment? There are some matters we need to discuss." Sarah nodded, following him out of the interview room and into an empty conference room down the hall. When the door closed behind them, Admiral Lawson's formal bearing relaxed slightly. "How are you holding up, Sarah?" he asked, using her first name for the first time. "I've been better," she admitted. "I was trying to keep a low profile." "I know. And you've done an admirable job of it for the past 3 years. But when stories start circulating about mysterious women with SEAL tattoos, it tends to reach the right ears fairly quickly." Sarah sank into a chair, suddenly, feeling exhausted. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Those men were lying about their service, and there was a young woman listening who believed them. I couldn't just let it slide." "I understand," Admiral Lawson said, taking his seat across from her. "And, for what it's worth, you did the right thing. Stolen valor is a serious problem, and it dishonors everyone who served legitimately." He paused, studying her face. "But, I have to ask, are you sure you're ready for this? Once word gets out that you're here, that you're accessible, things are going to change. There are people who've been looking for you, people who want to understand what happened during Operation Silent Thunder." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of memories she'd tried so hard to bury. Operation Silent Thunder had been the culmination of everything she'd trained for, everything she'd sacrificed to achieve. It had also been the operation that had ended her military career and forced her into hiding. "I know," she said quietly. "But I can't keep running forever. Maybe it's time to face whatever comes next." Admiral Lawson nodded approvingly. "You were always one of our best, Sarah. The program would never have worked without people like you, people willing to push boundaries and challenge assumptions about what's possible." The program. Even now, 3 years later, Sarah couldn't think about it without feeling a complex mix of pride and pain. She'd been one of only 12 women selected for the experimental training program, designed to test whether female operators could be successfully integrated into the most elite units of the military. The program had been classified at levels that most people couldn't imagine, run jointly by Naval Special Warfare Command and a shadowy Pentagon office that officially didn't exist. For 2 years, Sarah and her fellow candidates had endured training that made BUD/S look like summer camp, preparing for operations that required capabilities no male operator could provide. "How many people know I'm here?" she asked. "As of this morning? 3. Myself, my aide, and the analyst who flagged the police report. But that number will grow quickly if we don't control the situation." Admiral Lawson leaned forward, his expression serious. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you ready to come back?
The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond simple military service. Coming back would mean giving up the quiet life she'd built, the anonymity she treasured, the chance to be normal that she'd fought so hard to create. But it would also mean returning to work that mattered, to a purpose that went beyond designing logos and maintaining cover identities. It would mean using skills that had been honed to a razor's edge, capabilities that were sitting unused while the world grew more dangerous every day. What would that look like, she asked finally.
Different than before, Admiral Lawson admitted.
The old program was officially terminated after Silent Thunder.
Too much political heat, too many questions from people who didn't understand what we were trying to accomplish.
But there are new initiatives, new challenges that require your specific skill set. He pulled a business card from his wallet and placed it on the table between them.
Think about it. Take your time.
But understand that hiding in small towns and pretending to be someone else isn't going to work much longer. The world has a way of finding people with your abilities, whether you want to be found or not. Sarah picked up the card, recognizing the generic government phone number and the simple name, Robert Lawson, consultant. How long do I have to decide? She asked.
As long as you need, Admiral Lawson said, standing. But, Sarah? Don't wait too long. There are threats emerging that we're not equipped to handle with conventional assets.
We need people who can think outside the box, who can operate in spaces where traditional military forces can't go. He moved toward the door, then paused.
And, Sarah?
For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you accomplished.
All of it.
What happened during Silent Thunder wasn't your fault, and anyone who says otherwise doesn't understand the impossible situation you were placed in. After he left, Sarah sat alone in the conference room for several minutes, turning the business card over in her hands. Through the window, she could see the quiet streets of the small town she'd called home for 3 months, the normal people going about their normal lives. She thought about Emma, the young woman from the coffee shop, whose brother was considering military service. She thought about Jake Morrison and his friends, stealing honor they'd never earned. She thought about the real veterans she'd served alongside, the ones who'd paid prices that couldn't be measured in money or recognition. Most of all, she thought about the tattoo on her arm, the ink that marked her as something unique in military history, a woman who'd broken barriers that weren't supposed to be breakable, who'd proven capabilities that weren't supposed to exist. When Officer Reynolds knocked on the door 20 minutes later to tell her she was free to go, Sarah had made her decision. She wasn't sure yet what form it would take, or what the consequences would be, but she was done hiding. The drive back to her apartment gave her time to think about practical considerations. Her lease was month to month, her possessions minimal. She'd learned long ago to travel light, to be ready to disappear at a moment's notice. But this time would be different. This time, she wouldn't be running away from something. She would be running toward it. As she pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex, Sarah noticed a familiar figure sitting on the front steps.
Emma, the college student from the coffee shop, looked up as Sarah's car approached.
"I hope you don't mind," Emma said as Sarah got out of the car.
"I've been waiting for about an hour. I wanted to talk to you about what happened the other day." Sarah studied the young woman's face, seeing determination mixed with nervousness. "What about it?"
"Those men, Jake and his friends, they've been telling everyone who'll listen that you're some kind of fraud. They're saying you're a fake veteran who was trying to discredit real heroes." Sarah almost laughed at the irony, but she kept her expression neutral.
"What do you think?"
Emma was quiet for a moment, then met Sarah's eyes directly.
"I think they're full of crap.
I've been asking around about military stuff, talking to people who actually served. Everything you said that day was accurate. Everything they said was either wrong or impossible."
"That's good detective work," Sarah said, meaning it.
"My brother's recruiter confirmed it," Emma continued. "Those patches on Jake's jacket, no one person could ever earn all of them. And the stories they were telling, they sounded like bad movies."
Sarah unlocked the door to the building and gestured for Emma to follow her upstairs.
The young woman's persistence reminded her of herself at that age, determined to get to the truth, unwilling to accept easy answers.
"Why does it matter to you?" Sarah asked as they climbed the stairs.
"Because my brother's leaving for boot camp next month," Emma said. And, before he goes, I want him to understand the difference between real service and the fake stuff. I want him to know what genuine honor looks like."
Sarah opened her apartment door and invited Emma inside.
The sparse furnishings and minimal personal belongings didn't seem to surprise her guest. College students were used to temporary living situations.
"Would you like some coffee?" Sarah offered.
"Sure," Emma said, looking around the small space.
"You don't have much stuff."
"I move around a lot," Sarah explained, filling her small coffee maker with water.
"I prefer to travel light." Emma settled into one of the two chairs at the kitchen table. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask." "I might not answer." "Were you really in the military?"
Sarah measured coffee into the filter, using the routine task to buy herself time to think.
She'd already revealed more than she'd intended, first to Jake Morrison and then to the police.
But there was something about Emma's earnest curiosity that reminded her why she'd spoken up in the first place.
"Yes," she said finally. "I was." "In the SEALs?"
Sarah turned to face her, leaning against the kitchen counter.
"That's complicated." "Because women aren't allowed?"
"Because there are aspects of military service that aren't public knowledge," Sarah said carefully. "Sometimes, when the mission requires it, normal rules get modified."
Emma's eyes widened with understanding.
"You were part of something special.
Something classified."
"I was part of something that doesn't officially exist," Sarah corrected.
"And that's all I can tell you about it."
The coffee maker finished brewing with a soft gurgle. Sarah poured 2 cups and brought them to the table, sitting across from Emma.
"Why are you telling me this?" Emma asked.
"Because you deserve the truth," Sarah said simply. "Your brother's about to make one of the most important decisions of his life. He should understand what real service means, what real sacrifice looks like.
It's not about glory or recognition.
It's about being willing to do what's right, even when it's difficult, even when no one will ever know what you've done."
Emma wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, absorbing Sarah's words. "Will you talk to him? Before he leaves?" Sarah considered the request. Meeting with Emma's brother would mean further exposure, another person who knew she was here and what she represented.
But it would also be a chance to provide guidance to a young person entering military service, to help ensure he understood the real meaning of the oath he was about to take.
"If he wants to talk, I'm willing to listen," Sarah said.
Emma smiled for the first time since arriving.
"Thank you.
I think it would mean a lot to him."
They talked for another hour, Emma asking careful questions about military life and Sarah providing general answers that didn't reveal operational details.
When Emma finally left, Sarah found herself thinking about the conversation with Admiral Lawson and the decision she'd made. She was done hiding, but she wasn't sure yet what coming out of hiding would mean. The world had changed in the 3 years since Operation Silent Thunder, new threats emerging that required new responses. If Admiral Lawson was right, if there were challenges that conventional forces couldn't meet, then maybe it was time to stop pretending she was just another graphic designer trying to make a living. Sarah walked to her bedroom closet and pushed aside the few civilian clothes hanging there. In the back corner, wrapped in black plastic, was a small package she hadn't touched since moving to town. She pulled it out and carried it back to the kitchen table, then carefully unwrapped its contents. Inside was a single medal, its ribbon faded but its gold surface still bright. The Presidential Unit Citation, awarded to her unit for Operation Silent Thunder. Below it was a folded letter, written on official Navy letterhead but signed by someone whose name was still classified 3 years later. Sarah read the letter again, even though she'd memorized every word long ago. It spoke of service above and beyond the call of duty, of sacrifices that could never be publicly recognized, of a debt that the nation owed to those willing to serve in shadows. She thought about Emma's brother, about to begin his own military journey. She thought about Jake Morrison and his stolen valor, dishonoring real veterans with his lies. She thought about Admiral Lawson's words, about threats that required unconventional responses. Most of all, she thought about the tattoo on her arm and what it truly represented. Not just her own achievements, but the dreams and aspirations of every woman who'd ever wondered if the barriers were real or just perceived limitations. Sarah folded the letter carefully and returned it to its wrapping, but she left the medal on the table where she could see it. Tomorrow, she would call the number on Admiral Lawson's card. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of returning to a world she'd tried to leave behind. Tonight, she would remember why she joined that world in the first place, and prepare herself for whatever came next. Sarah stared at Admiral Lawson's business card for 3 days before she found the courage to dial the number. When she finally made the call, she was transferred twice before reaching a receptionist who seemed to expect her contact.
Ms. Martinez, the woman said professionally. Admiral Lawson has been waiting for your call. Please hold for just a moment.
The brief wait gave Sarah time to second-guess her decision, but before she could hang up, the Admiral's familiar voice came through the line.
Sarah. I was beginning to wonder if you'd changed your mind.
I needed time to think, she replied.
But I'm ready to hear what you have in mind. Good. There's a facility about 2 hours north of your current location. Can you be there tomorrow at 1400 hours? Sarah grabbed a pen and wrote down the address Admiral Lawson provided.
It was in a part of Virginia she wasn't familiar with, somewhere between her small coastal town and the sprawling military installations around Norfolk.
What should I expect? She asked.
A conversation, Admiral Lawson said. With people who understand what you've been through and what you're capable of. After that, we'll see where things stand. The next morning, Sarah packed a small overnight bag, not knowing if she'd be returning to her apartment that evening or starting a new chapter that would take her far from the quiet life she'd built. She left her laptop and work materials behind. If she came back, she could resume her freelance career.
If she didn't, those obligations would seem very small in retrospect.
The drive north took her through increasingly rural countryside, past farms and forests that gave no hint of the military installations hidden among them. The address Admiral Lawson had provided led her to what appeared to be a corporate office complex, complete with a sign advertising a technology consulting firm she'd never heard of. Sarah parked in the visitors section and walked to the main entrance, where a security guard checked her identification against a list before directing her to the 3rd floor. The elevator opened onto a hallway that looked like any other office building, with neutral carpet and generic artwork on the walls. Room 315 was marked with a small placard reading Conference Room A.
Sarah knocked once and entered to find Admiral Lawson waiting with 2 other people she didn't recognize.
Sarah, thank you for coming, Admiral Lawson said, rising from his seat at a polished conference table. I'd like you to meet Dr. Elizabeth Chen and Colonel James Rodriguez.
Dr.
Chen was a woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a simple business suit that suggested government employment without advertising it. Colonel Rodriguez was younger, perhaps mid-30s, with the kind of bearing that suggested recent field experience rather than desk duty. Please, have a seat, Dr. Chen said, gesturing to the chair across from them.
Admiral Lawson has told us quite a bit about your background and capabilities. Sarah settled into the indicated chair, studying the faces across from her. What exactly are we discussing here?
Your future, Colonel Rodriguez said bluntly. And, possibly the country's ability to address emerging threats that don't fit conventional response protocols. Dr. Chen opened a folder and consulted several documents before continuing.
Ms. Martinez, are you familiar with the concept of asymmetric warfare?
Generally, Sarah replied. Conflicts where traditional military advantages don't apply, where smaller forces use unconventional tactics to achieve strategic objectives.
Exactly. And, in the current global environment, we're seeing an increase in threats that fall into that category. Situations where sending conventional forces would be either ineffective or politically impossible. Admiral Lawson leaned forward. Sarah, the program you were part of 3 years ago was ahead of its time.
The political climate wasn't ready for female operators in certain roles, and, after Operation Silent Thunder, the decision was made to terminate the initiative.
I remember, Sarah said quietly.
But, the need for those capabilities hasn't disappeared, Colonel Rodriguez continued.
If anything, it's become more urgent.
We're facing adversaries who don't respect traditional rules of engagement, who use our own social conventions against us.
Dr. Chen slid a photograph across the table.
It showed a woman in her 20s with dark hair and Middle Eastern features, smiling at what appeared to be a social gathering.
Amara Hassan, Dr. Chen explained.
26 years old, born in Lebanon, educated at Oxford and MIT. On the surface, she's a software engineer working for a tech startup in Berlin.
In reality, she's the operational commander for a network of terrorists who've been responsible for attacks across 3 continents.
Sarah studied the photograph, noting the subject's confident posture and the intelligence evident in her eyes.
What makes her special?
She operates exclusively in environments where male agents would be ineffective, Admiral Lawson explained. High society gatherings, women's organizations, academic conferences. She recruits female operatives who can move freely in spaces that male terrorists can't access. Traditional counter-terrorism approaches have been completely ineffective, Colonel Rodriguez added. We can't infiltrate her network with male agents, and the few female intelligence officers with the necessary language skills and cultural background don't have the operational training to function at her level. Dr. Chen opened another folder, revealing surveillance photographs and what appeared to be intercepted communications. 6 months ago, we identified a plot to attack a women's rights conference in Geneva. 300 attendees, including senators, cabinet officials, and international leaders.
All women.
Sarah felt a chill run through her as she examined the documents.
The scope and sophistication of the planned attack was evident even in the preliminary intelligence summaries.
Hassan's network had infiltrated the conference planning committee, Admiral Lawson continued.
Female operatives posing as security consultants, catering staff, even journalists.
The attack would have been devastating, not just in terms of casualties but for the symbolic impact.
Was it stopped? Sarah asked.
By luck, Colonel Rodriguez said grimly. A traffic accident delayed one of the key operatives, and local police found explosive materials in her hotel room during a routine investigation. But we know it was just one of several operations in development.
Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair, studying Sarah's reaction. Ms. Martinez, what we're discussing here is the creation of a new type of response capability. Small teams of female operators with the training and authority to function independently in high-risk environments. Black operations, Sarah said, understanding the implications immediately. Officially, they wouldn't exist, Admiral Lawson confirmed. Plausible deniability would be essential.
But the operators would have access to resources and support networks that conventional intelligence agencies can't provide. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing what she'd heard. The proposal was both familiar and entirely new, similar to her previous service but expanded in scope and complexity. What would my role be, she asked finally. Initially, training and assessment, Dr. Chen replied. We've identified 12 potential candidates, all with exceptional backgrounds in various fields. But they need the kind of operational training that you received, adapted for the specific challenges they'll face.
Colonel Rodriguez slid another document across the table.
After the training phase, you'd lead the operational teams. Full tactical command, with support from intelligence agencies but independence of action in the field.
Sarah scanned the personnel files, noting the diverse backgrounds of the potential candidates.
Linguists, computer specialists, former military intelligence officers, even a professional athlete who'd competed internationally. All women, all with skills that could be adapted for covert operations. Where would this training take place, she asked. A facility in Montana, Admiral Lawson said. Isolated, secure, with capabilities that rival anything in the military inventory. The same contractor who designed the original program has been building something new, something specifically tailored for this type of operation. Dr. Chen opened her laptop and turned it toward Sarah, showing satellite images of what appeared to be a remote compound surrounded by wilderness. The cover story is a corporate retreat center for tech companies. In reality, it's one of the most advanced training facilities ever constructed. Sarah studied the images, recognizing elements of specialized training environments she'd encountered before. Shooting ranges, obstacle courses, mock urban environments for practicing close-quarters combat. But there were also elements she didn't recognize, facilities that look more like movie sets than military installations. Social infiltration training, Colonel Rodriguez explained, noting her confused expression. Mock embassy receptions, simulated board meetings, even replica hotel suites and restaurants. The operators need to be as comfortable in a cocktail dress at a diplomatic function as they are with a pistol in a combat zone. The scope of what they were proposing was beginning to sink in. This wasn't just military training adapted for female operators, it was an entirely new concept of warfare, requiring skills that bridged multiple disciplines. How long would the training program last? Sarah asked. 8 months, Dr. Chen replied. Intensive, full-time preparation. The candidates would be officially on leave from their current positions or provided with cover stories to explain their absence. Admiral Lawson leaned forward. Sarah, I need to be clear about something. This program represents a significant departure from traditional military structure. The operators would have broad discretion in how they accomplish their missions, including the authority to make decisions that could have international implications.
You're talking about assassinations, Sarah said quietly. Among other things, Colonel Rodriguez confirmed.
But also intelligence gathering, sabotage, and disruption of terrorist networks.
The full spectrum of special operations, adapted for threats that conventional forces can't address.
Sarah felt the familiar weight of moral complexity that had defined her previous service. The missions they were describing would require her to make decisions that could affect thousands of lives, often with incomplete information and little time for careful consideration. "What happened to the other women from my original program?" she asked.
Admiral Lawson's expression grew somber.
2 are serving in conventional military roles, their special training unacknowledged in their official records. 3 left the service entirely and are working in private sector jobs. 1 is teaching at a military academy, though she can't discuss what she's actually qualified to teach. He paused, meeting Sarah's eyes. And 1 was killed in Iraq 2 years ago, serving with a unit that didn't understand her capabilities or how to use them effectively.
The news hit Sarah like a physical blow.
She hadn't stayed in contact with her fellow candidates after the program ended, but they'd shared experiences that created bonds deeper than friendship. Knowing that one of them had died in a conventional operation, unable to use the extraordinary skills she'd developed, made Sarah feel a familiar anger about wasted potential.
"What was her name?" Sarah asked quietly. "Lieutenant Maria Santos."
She was with a convoy that was ambushed outside Fallujah. According to the after-action reports, she neutralized 6 attackers with a sidearm before being overwhelmed. Her commanding officer couldn't understand how a supply clerk had acquired such advanced combat skills. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering Maria's laugh and her absolute dedication to proving that women could excel in any military role.
The thought of her dying in anonymity, her true capabilities unrecognized, strengthened Sarah's resolve about the decision she'd been contemplating.
"If I agree to this," Sarah said, opening her eyes, "I want something in return."
"What's that?" Dr. Chen asked.
"Maria Santos deserves recognition for what she accomplished, even if it's classified. And the other women from our program deserve to know about this new opportunity. If they're qualified and interested, they should be considered for the training positions."
Admiral Lawson nodded approvingly. "I was hoping you'd say that."
In fact, 2 of them have already been contacted and expressed interest.
"They're among the 12 candidates we'd like you to evaluate." Colonel Rodriguez consulted his watch.
"Ms. Martinez, I know this is a lot to process, but we need a decision relatively quickly.
The facility in Montana is ready, and we have intelligence suggesting that Hassan's network is accelerating their operational timeline."
Sarah looked around the conference room, at the faces of 3 people who represented a world she'd tried to leave behind. But the urgency in their voices and the scope of the threat they described made it clear that her quiet life as a graphic designer had been an illusion from the beginning.
"When would you need me to start?" she asked.
2 weeks, Dr. Chen replied. "That gives you time to arrange your civilian affairs and prepare for an extended absence."
"And after the training program? After the 8 months?" Admiral Lawson's expression was serious.
"That depends on what we learn during the training and how the global situation develops.
But realistically, this could be a long-term commitment. Years, not months."
Sarah thought about Emma's brother, about to leave for Marine boot camp with dreams of serving his country. She thought about Jake Morrison and his stolen valor, profiting from honor he'd never earned. She thought about Maria Santos, dying in obscurity while possessing capabilities that could have changed the course of the battle. Most of all, she thought about the photograph of Amara Hassan and the network of female terrorists who were exploiting society's blind spots to accomplish their deadly objectives.
"I'll do it," Sarah said finally. "But I have some conditions."
"We're listening," Admiral Lawson said.
"First, I want complete authority over the training program.
No interference from conventional military doctrine or political considerations. The operators need to be prepared for the realities they'll face, not the situations that politicians think they should face."
"Agreed," Colonel Rodriguez said immediately. "Second, I want direct communication with intelligence sources.
If these operators are going to function independently, they need access to real-time information, not sanitized summaries prepared by people who've never been in the field."
Dr. Chen nodded. "That can be arranged." Third, I want the program's existence compartmentalized at the highest levels. No briefings to congressional committees, no mention in budget documents, no paper trails that can be used for political purposes later. Admiral Lawson smiled slightly. Ms. Martinez, this program is so classified that even discussing it requires special clearances. I can guarantee you the level of secrecy you're requesting. Sarah stood, extending her hand across the conference table. Then, let's get started. The handshake felt like stepping through a doorway into a future she couldn't fully envision but knew she was meant to embrace. As she left the anonymous office building and drove back toward her temporary home, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension that reminded her of her first day of SEAL training years earlier. She had 2 weeks to close out her civilian life and prepare for a return to a world of classified operations and life-or-death decisions. But, for the first time in 3 years, she felt like she was moving towards something instead of running away from it. The small coastal town where she'd sought anonymity looked different as she drove through its quiet streets. Instead of a refuge, it now seemed like a way station, a place where she'd waited until she was ready to accept who she really was and what the world needed her to become. Sarah spent the evening making lists of practical considerations, ending her lease, completing her freelance projects, creating a cover story for her extended absence. But, underneath the mundane details was a growing sense of purpose that she'd missed more than she'd realized. She was going back to war, but this time it would be a conflict unlike anything she'd fought before. The enemy was adapting, evolving, using society's own progress toward gender equality as a weapon. The response required evolution as well, capabilities that challenged every assumption about how special operations could be conducted. As she fell asleep that night, Sarah thought about the 12 women who would soon arrive at the facility in Montana, ready to be transformed into something the world had never seen before. They would face challenges that would test every limit of their abilities, prepare for missions that would require them to walk a narrow line between heroism and horror. But, they would also have the chance to prove that the barriers that had limited women in military service were artificial constructs, not natural limitations. They would demonstrate capabilities that would expand the definition of what was possible in the most demanding fields of human endeavor. Sarah had spent 3 years hiding from her past, but now she was ready to embrace a future that would be built on everything that past had taught her. The woman who had earned the right to wear a SEAL trident was about to become something even more extraordinary. The question now was whether the world was ready for what she and her team would become. 6 months later, Sarah stood on an observation deck overlooking the training compound in Montana, watching 12 women execute a complex infiltration exercise with precision that would have impressed veteran special operations units. The facility stretched across a hidden valley surrounded by mountains, its buildings designed to blend seamlessly with the natural landscape while housing some of the most advanced training equipment ever assembled. The women below were attempting to penetrate a mock embassy compound, using a combination of social engineering, technical surveillance, and direct action techniques that represented the culmination of everything they'd learned during their intensive preparation. Sarah monitored their progress through multiple camera feeds and radio communications, making mental notes about each operator's performance. Alpha Team is approaching the main entrance, came the voice of Rebecca Walsh, a former Army intelligence officer who'd emerged as one of the program's natural leaders. Security sweep complete, no electronic surveillance detected. Through the thermal imaging system, Sarah watched Rebecca and her partner move through the simulated diplomatic reception with fluid grace, their evening gowns concealing advanced communication equipment and compact weapons. They'd spent weeks learning to fight in formal wear, to use high heels as weapons, to extract intelligence while maintaining perfect social composure. Bravo Team in position at the service entrance, reported Dr. Samantha Kim, a former CDC epidemiologist who traded her laboratory for combat training when she learned her infectious disease expertise could be weaponized by terrorists. Kitchen staff neutralized, access to main building secured. The third team, led by Captain Jennifer Torres, a former Marine who'd left active duty when she reached her service's glass ceiling, was approaching through the building's ventilation system. Their mission was to plant surveillance devices in the ambassador's private office while the reception provided cover noise and distraction. Sarah keyed her radio. Control to all teams. Primary objective is intelligence gathering, but remember that Hassan's network has proven willing to sacrifice operatives to protect their plans. Assume any security personnel are armed and trained. The exercise was based on real intelligence about Amara Hassan's operational methods, adapted for training purposes but retaining the complexity and danger of actual field conditions. The mock embassy contained professional actors playing various roles, some of whom were former intelligence operatives themselves,
creating an environment as realistic as possible without crossing into actual espionage. "Sir, we have a problem," came the voice of Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the team's communications specialist, stationed in the command center below. "Thermal imaging is detecting armed guards in positions not shown on the building schematics."
Sarah frowned, studying the tactical display.
The exercise was supposed to follow a predetermined script, with known variables and controlled risks. The presence of additional security suggested either a malfunction in the system or an intentional escalation by the training staff.
"Charlie team, abort current approach," Sarah ordered. "Something's changed."
But Captain Torres' voice came back immediately, calm despite the implications of what Sarah had reported.
"Negative, Control. Mission parameters indicate this is a time-sensitive operation. We're continuing to primary objective."
The response demonstrated exactly the kind of independent thinking and calculated risk-taking that Sarah had been trying to instill in her operators. Torres understood that real missions wouldn't wait for perfect conditions, and she was making the decision to proceed based on tactical considerations rather than training safety. Through the building's internal cameras, Sarah watched as Rebecca and her partner identified their target, a man playing the role of a weapons dealer who was supposed to have information about Hassan's next operation. The social infiltration was proceeding flawlessly, with Rebecca engaging the target in conversation while her partner positioned herself to overhear other conversations that might contain valuable intelligence. "Alpha Team has made contact with primary target," Rebecca reported quietly, her voice barely audible through the covert microphone system. "Subject is discussing arms shipments to European cities, matching intelligence parameters for Hassan network operations." Meanwhile, Dr. Kim's team had successfully penetrated the building's lower levels and was working to access the computer systems that would contain the embassy's communication records. Their mission was to plant malware that would allow long-term monitoring of the facility's electronic traffic, a skill that had required months of intensive cyber warfare training on top of their physical preparation. "Bravo team has accessed primary server room," Dr. Kim reported. "Beginning installation of surveillance package.
Estimate 4 minutes to completion."
The third team, despite the unexpected security complications, had reached their objective. Captain Torres and her partner were inside the ambassador's office, photographing documents and installing listening devices with the efficiency of veteran intelligence operatives. "Charlie team has secured primary intelligence," Torres whispered. "Multiple documents suggesting coordination between target organization and diplomatic personnel."
"This goes deeper than we anticipated."
Sarah felt a familiar chill at those words. Even in a training exercise, the implications of diplomatic corruption and terrorist infiltration were sobering reminders of why this program existed. The threats they were preparing to face weren't abstract policy concerns, they were immediate dangers to national security that required immediate and decisive action. "All teams, begin extraction procedures," Sarah ordered.
"Remember, getting out is often harder than getting in."
What followed was the most challenging part of any covert operation, leaving the target area without detection while carrying intelligence that could expose the entire mission if discovered. The three teams had to coordinate their departures to avoid suspicion while dealing with the increased security that Torres had detected. Rebecca and her partner faced the additional challenge of maintaining their social cover while gradually disengaging from the reception. They couldn't simply disappear, as that would alert security to a potential breach. Instead, they had to create plausible reasons for leaving while ensuring they weren't followed.
"Alpha team requesting permission to initiate emergency extraction protocol," Rebecca said, her voice tense. "Target has become suspicious and is asking questions we can't answer without compromising cover." Sarah made a split-second decision that reflected the kind of judgment these operators would need in the field. "Alpha team, implement Protocol 7. Bravo and Charlie teams, accelerate your timelines."
Protocol 7 was a contingency plan they developed for situations where social cover was failing. It involved creating a medical emergency that would justify rapid departure while generating enough confusion to mask any security concerns. Rebecca's partner would simulate a severe allergic reaction, requiring immediate medical attention and providing cover for their exit. The plan worked perfectly, with Rebecca's partner collapsing dramatically in the middle of the reception while Rebecca called for emergency assistance. In the confusion that followed, both women were able to slip away while concerned guests and diplomatic staff focused on the apparent medical crisis.
Dr.
Kim's team faced different challenges, as they had to ensure that their electronic infiltration remained undetected while physically exiting through service areas where they were more likely to encounter security personnel. Their extraction route took them through kitchen areas and maintenance corridors, requiring them to avoid detection while moving quickly enough to support the overall mission timeline. Bravo team clear of primary facility, Dr. Kim reported.
Electronic surveillance package is active and undetected.
Estimate 12 hours before routine security sweeps might identify our modifications. Captain Torres and her partner had perhaps the most difficult extraction, as they had to exit through an upper floor window and make their way down the building's exterior while avoiding both electronic surveillance and the human guards who were now on heightened alert due to the disturbance caused by Alpha Team's emergency extraction. Charlie Team beginning external descent, Torres reported.
Security sweep in progress, but alternate route remains viable.
Sarah watched through night vision cameras as the two women rappelled down the building's exterior with equipment they'd concealed in their mission gear. The descent required perfect timing and coordination, as they had to avoid illuminated areas while maintaining speed sufficient to reach their extraction vehicle before security forces could coordinate a proper response.
All teams, rendezvous at Extraction Point Delta, Sarah ordered as the final phase of the operation began. Time from initiation to completion, 37 minutes. Outstanding work.
The three teams converged on a wooded area 2 miles from the embassy compound, where vehicles waited to transport them back to the main training facility. As they loaded their equipment and prepared for the debrief session that would analyze every aspect of their performance, Sarah felt a profound sense of satisfaction at what these women had accomplished. 6 months earlier, they had been civilians with various professional backgrounds but no experience in covert operations. Tonight, they had executed a complex multi-team infiltration mission that would have challenged experienced Special Forces operators. More importantly, they had demonstrated the ability to adapt to changing conditions and make independent decisions under pressure. The debrief session lasted 3 hours, with each team presenting their observations and lessons learned while Sarah and her training staff analyzed their performance from multiple perspectives. The level of tactical sophistication and operational awareness the women displayed was remarkable, but what impressed Sarah most was their ability to maintain focus on mission objectives while managing the complex social and psychological demands of covert operations. The intelligence we gathered tonight, even in a training scenario, demonstrates vulnerabilities in diplomatic security that could be exploited by hostile forces, Rebecca observed during her team's presentation.
The level of access we achieved suggests that real threats could penetrate similar facilities with relative ease.
Dr. Kim's analysis focused on the electronic warfare aspects of the mission. The embassy's computer security was adequate against conventional cyber attacks, but it wasn't designed to counter physical infiltration combined with electronic surveillance. We were able to install monitoring systems that would have provided long-term intelligence gathering capabilities. Captain Torres addressed the broader strategic implications of what they'd discovered. The coordination between diplomatic personnel and potential hostile forces suggests that traditional approaches to embassy security may be inadequate. We need to consider the possibility that threats could come from within diplomatic facilities, not just external attacks. Sarah listened to their assessments with growing pride and concern. The women had grasped not just the tactical requirements of their mission, but the strategic implications of what they'd learned. They were thinking like intelligence professionals, considering how their operations fit into larger patterns of national security. But their sophistication also highlighted the magnitude of the threats they would soon face in actual operations. If training scenarios could reveal such serious vulnerabilities, what would they discover when they confronted real terrorist networks with months or years to develop their infiltration capabilities? Outstanding work tonight, Sarah said as the debrief session concluded. You've demonstrated mastery of skills that took years to develop, and you've proven that this program can produce operators capable of addressing threats that conventional forces cannot counter. She paused, studying the faces of the 12 women who had transformed themselves into something unprecedented in military history. But tonight was the final training exercise. Next week, we begin operational deployment. The announcement brought immediate attention from every person in the room. They had known this moment was coming, but the transition from training to actual operations represented a fundamental shift in their lives and purpose. Admiral Lawson will be here tomorrow to provide our first operational briefing, Sarah continued. I can tell you that the intelligence we've received indicates Hassan's network has accelerated their timeline. There are indications of planned attacks in multiple European cities, timed to coincide with an international summit on women's rights.
the irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room.
The same summit that would celebrate progress in gender equality was being targeted by terrorists who had weaponized society's blind spots about female operatives. The attacks would be devastating not just in terms of casualties, but for their symbolic impact, Sarah explained. Hassan has calculated that striking at a gathering of women's rights advocates would send a message about the vulnerability of Western societies and the futility of social progress. Dr. Kim raised her hand.
What's our specific mission? Infiltration and neutralization of the terrorist network, Sarah replied.
Traditional intelligence agencies have been unable to penetrate Hassan's organization because it operates exclusively in environments where male agents cannot function effectively. You will be the first operatives with both the access and the capabilities necessary to stop them.
The weight of responsibility was evident in every face around the conference table.
These women had trained intensively for this moment, but the reality of operational deployment brought home the life and death consequences of everything they'd learned.
I won't lie to you, Sarah said.
This mission will be dangerous, and there's a high probability that some of you won't come home. But the alternative is allowing terrorist attacks that could kill hundreds of people and set back progress on issues you've all indicated you care deeply about.
Captain Torres spoke for the group.
We understand the risks, and we accept them.
This is what we trained for.
The next morning, Admiral Lawson arrived by helicopter, accompanied by Dr. Chen and a team of intelligence specialists who would provide operational support for the mission. The briefing they delivered confirmed Sarah's worst fears about the scope and sophistication of Hassan's network. We've identified confirmed operational cells in Berlin, Paris, and London, Admiral Lawson explained, using satellite photographs and surveillance imagery to illustrate the threat.
Each cell consists of female operatives who have successfully infiltrated the security apparatus surrounding the Women's Rights Summit.
The photographs showed women who look like typical international conference attendees, professional dress, confident bearing, nothing that would attract security attention. But intelligence analysis had revealed their connections to Hassan's organization and their roles in planning coordinated attacks. The attacks are scheduled for 3 days from now, Dr. Chen added. Simultaneous explosions during the opening ceremony, time to maximize casualties and media coverage. The perpetrators are prepared to die in the attacks, making conventional law enforcement approaches ineffective. Colonel Rodriguez presented the operational plan that would deploy Sarah's teams to counter the threat. Alpha Team will infiltrate the Berlin cell, Bravo Team takes Paris, and Charlie Team handles London. You'll have complete autonomy in the field, with support from local intelligence assets but ultimate authority over tactical decisions.
Sarah studied the mission parameters, recognizing both the opportunities and the risks involved.
The plan gave her operators maximum flexibility to adapt to changing conditions, but it also placed enormous responsibility on their judgment and capabilities.
What about local law enforcement? Rebecca asked. How do we coordinate with German, French, and British authorities without compromising operational security? Admiral Lawson's expression was serious. You don't.
This operation is completely off the books, with plausible deniability built into every aspect.
If you're captured or killed, the US government will deny any knowledge of your activities. The room fell silent as the implications sank in.
These women were about to undertake missions that would make them, in effect, ghosts, operators who existed outside official military structure and legal protection.
I need to ask each of you individually, Sarah said, looking around the table. Are you prepared to accept this level of risk and responsibility? There's no shame in stepping back.
This goes beyond anything we discussed when the program began. One by one, each woman confirmed her commitment to the mission. Their responses varied in wording but were unanimous in their determination to proceed, despite the dangers and the lack of official recognition they would receive for their service.
Then, let's get to work, Sarah said.
We have 72 hours to prevent terrorist attacks that could change the course of international relations. It's time to prove that this program can deliver on its promises. As the teams prepared for deployment, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of fear and excitement that preceded every dangerous mission. But, this time, the stakes were higher than anything she'd faced before. The success or failure of this operation would determine not just the fate of hundreds of potential victims, but the future of female participation in the most elite levels of military service. The women she'd trained for 6 months were about